Hey y'all. Today, Blizzard held their first of two upcoming developer update live streams coming for Diablo 4, talking about Season 2, going over details on the season, upcoming changes, and all that kind of stuff. So I watched that today, and I have a bunch of notes about what they talked about, and I will hopefully be able to not spend too much time talking about it. We'll see how long it actually takes me. Front half of the video, just going to be all the informational stuff, and then I will go more into opinions and other things coming in the second half of the video. Just as a reminder, Season 2 does launch on October 17th. They specify it's actually going to be 10 a.m. Pacific time. That is West Coast time in the US. So if you want to be live on server start, that's 10 a.m. Pacific on October 17th. And that there will also be a second developer live stream next week on October 10th. That's going to be more talking about class changes, stat changes to like resistances and critical damage and vulnerable damage and that kind of stuff. So those more nitty-gritty details, that stuff will be coming later next week in another developer live stream. This is more overview stuff of the season and general updates to the game. So here we go. They briefly talked about the story of the season. It revolves around Eris. She's a vampire hunter trying to hunt this new vampire lord who has come up to power in Sanctuary, and we're going to help her try and stop him. Sounds very similar to Season 1's plot, but so be it. It is what it is. It's fine. So our claim to fame to the season is going to be that we will be infected with vampirism, but due to Lilith's influence due to the campaign, we actually don't succumb to some of the downsides of being a vampire. So we basically get all the benefits but no downsides, which means we now have vampire powers, which is the new kind of seasonal power, like player power progression going on in Season 2. So what this looks like is armor will have packs on it, and there's different types of packs, and you can combine them together in a new user interface, and you can unlock vampiric powers. They showcased a couple of them on the stream. They'll probably show up here in the video in the background at some point. So it doesn't use your like jewelry sockets like the Malignant Hearts did in Season 1. It's its own separate like kind of user interface that you can select them in. So the packs on the armor, you do have to... My understanding is that the packs do need to like line up properly, so the armor you equip will need to have the right packs to use some of these powers, but it seems like you can actually interchange them, so it's not like a locked-in system where you can't change the packs that are on the armor, so it looks like you can actually apply them to armor, so that's pretty good in my book. So you can kind of flex what vampire powers you want to be using through that interface. Another new activity coming to Diablo 4 is called a Blood Harvest. These are always active, and they take over a particular zone on the map. They will start at level 1, so you can do them immediately. They function pretty similar to Helltides, but they aren't a Helltide replacement. They just happen alongside Helltides. And there are basically vampiric enemies that you can go kill there, and there are things called blood lures that you can use to summon blood seekers. So an interesting enemy type they're adding are called blood seekers, and these are essentially player characters that have turned into like elite monsters essentially. So there are blood seekers that are like barbarian, rogue, necromancer, sorcerer, all the druid themed, all the classes basically have a blood seeker variance to them. So they will kind of jump on you and whirlwind and do other things, and so they're kind of just these pre-made elites using the actual player abilities to fight against you. So we'll see how strong they are, but even Path of Exile does stuff with like the rogue exiles and things like that. So I'm cool with that. There's some extra additional enemies like some vampire skeletons and other things like that that have been added to the game as well, and they each have their own little twist and things to look out for. So we'll see how impactful those are. In the Blood Harvest, there are vampiric caches, which just give you loot and other things like that. There is no limited currency like Helltides, so Helltides have the cinders that will expire when the Helltide expires, but the Blood Harvest currencies and stuff like that will always be active. You don't like lose them if you leave Blood Harvest. There's always one active. They will rotate around the map, but there's always going to be one active, so there's never like downtime on the Blood Harvest, so you can always go do them. There's a currency called the Hunter's Acclaim. You can apparently go to a board in town, it looked like, and there are various things to spend that on. There's like random items, kind of gambler vendor style and other things to spend those on. And again, not replaced by Hell Tides, but they will both coexist when you get to like World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, so you can do either of them for different reasons. We spent a fair bit of time talking about the content progression. So they are referring to your content progression as the player. So the 1 to 50 experience, and then like the 50 to 70 experience, and then 70 to 100 experience. And they kind of talk about how the current experience is, you do 1 to 50 normal leveling, and then you got World Tier 3, you get Sacred Items, World Tier 4, you got Ancestral Items, and you got Hell Tides, and then eventually you go to Uber Lilith if you want to fight her at level 100. So they're kind of going to flex this a little bit by adding in bosses, and there's going to be 5 new bosses overall into the game, and some of them will actually be available earlier in World Tier 3. They're not all like level 100 Uber versions of these bosses. And the main purpose of these bosses is that they will actually have specific loot tables so that you can target farm unique items. That's one of the big reasons to go do them. So let's say you need to get a particular helmet. Maybe you want your Tempest Roar as a druid. Well, they didn't specify which boss will be dropping which things. At least I don't think they did. But there are specific item like drops you can get from each of these bosses. So some of them will be available even at World Tier 3. And so they kind of will serve as progression checkpoints, so to speak, where you can do them as you level up in World Tier 3. And there's, of course, more in World Tier 4. They did specify that, for example, Varshan is a returning boss from Season 1, and he will be in World Tier 3. And the way to access these bosses is that you have to basically acquire summoning items to fight these bosses. And you can get these by doing specific activities. So they provide an example. So for you to fight Varshan, you can do Tree of Whispers, and the Whisper caches can sometimes drop these currencies and stuff to summon Varshan or let you go fight him, basically. So this seems to be true for all of the new bosses they're adding. There's different pieces of content you can go do, and doing those contents will provide you items over time to eventually fight these bosses. And in an effort to promote trade, they are allowing you to trade these items that let you summon these bosses. So let's say you want to trade your Varshan summon items for like an Andariel summon or Duriel summon or whatever. You can go do that via trade. It's talked about later in the Q&A section. There's not going to be like a trade website, but they're hoping that people will provide feedback on that. So if you want a trade website, I would highly suggest we start talking about a proper way to trade outside of using third-party websites or Discord. So anyway, overall content progression, they're hoping these new world bosses, or not world bosses, these new high-tier bosses will provide new challenges and ways to progress your character as you continue to level up, even through the kind of mid-game in World Tier 3. Some of the bosses are actually elemental themed, which will coincide with the resistance changes, which they did not talk about today. Again, that will be next week, where they go more into detail about the stat changes. There are some cosmetic items to earn from them as well, so there's some new loot and like horse armor that you can actually earn by defeating these bosses, so some new stuff for you to look even cooler in game. So that is the A+ in my book. These are actually available in the Eternal Realm as well. These are not seasonal only, so even if you did not want to play on season, you can still fight these new bosses that they're adding to the game and target farm. That's a permanent addition to the game, and they will continue to add more bosses later on in the future. So now we have general updates for the game. If you play hardcore, Scroll of Escape is going to be properly consumed when you disconnect. The incenses, which is like the AoE buff around your character, those provide XP. XP bonuses are now multiplicative with the world tier bonus XP, so you will straight up be leveling a lot faster now. They actually estimated that it's actually going to be about 40% faster to level to 100 compared to Season 1. So leveling to 100 is going to be way, way, way faster. You can easily level like 1 to 100 in a day if you blast for a very long session. So speedruns are going to be much faster going forward now, at least for Season 2. So they want players to kind of not feel like they're stuck around level 75 to 80 where they kind of start boring out of the game. It's a very common point for people around that level range to kind of not play anymore. So they're trying to get people to level 100 faster, and so that they can more likely to interact with the new bosses and other new stuff going on in Season 2. Renown rewards are account-wide. This includes all of the skill points and Paragon points, the Obel capacity, all that stuff is permanently account-wide forever now, so you no longer have to do that. They're unlocking more of the waypoints immediately as well if you skip the campaign. They're not unlocking all the waypoints on the map, but they're unlocking a lot of the commonly used ones as well to make the early teleporting around in the map not as bad. So, cool. They're adding 2 new character slots, just to everybody. They will be adding an occultist to the Tree Whispers waypoint, so Tree Whispers is going to be popping because you can kind of do everything there now. So that is super nice to see. All the small towns that have a waypoint will also have a stash. Extra stashes will be closer to important vendors in major cities, so there's going to be a couple different stashes around in each of the major cities. And the gambler vendors are no longer going to be in Narnia and will now be a lot closer to the waypoint in each major city as well. They are improving mounts, so they are much less likely to be stuck on everything, like all the random walls and stuff in the open world, so they should be a lot smoother to use now. There are these little interactable like jumping points where you like would hit space bar and you would like jump over the gap or whatever, so that should be a lot easier to use on the mount as well. It was always possible on the mount, but it was really finicky and not very consistent. They're improving the base movement speed for mounts, and the top speed is not changed, but you should just overall move faster on average. The boost button on the horse is also going to be improved. It will have a lower cooldown and last longer. So they basically said you can kind of just use it forever. So it's almost always available. So there shouldn't be a lot of downtime on that. If you use the speed boost on the horse, it will also break through barriers in the open world. So you will no longer get stuck on them. And the the dismounts attacks are going to be reduced in cooldown as well. All the dismounts actually for the mount will be reduced in cooldown. So it should be much more smoother and much faster to ride around in mounts in the open world, which they seem to try and be incentivizing this season. Nightmare Dungeons are getting a good amount of changes. So you will, most important of all, Nightmare Dungeons, you will now teleport inside the dungeon directly. You no longer teleport outside the dungeon and then have to loading screen in. It will actually straight just teleport you inside the dungeon now. So it just saves you a loading screen, even better. Events within dungeons are going to be improved. They'll have more enemies. The NPCs in these events also will no longer get one shot anymore. At least they shouldn't. So we'll see how that goes. They're improving readability on some traps in dungeons and boss attacks as well. You'll get more Paragon Glyph XP per run of a Nightmare Dungeon, so you can level your glyphs a bit faster now as well. Some dungeons do not have any objectives anymore, and they are simply go to the boss and kill the boss. So they want some feedback on that. So I would like to see some more dungeons that are just kill the boss instead of having to do a bunch of different random things. And of course, some dungeons have been looked at to help reduce the amount of backtracking. A while back, they removed some Nightmare Dungeon affixes from the pool because they really, really sucked. And so they have come back in returned form, and they don't seem as bad. So first up, backstabbers. This modifier used to just make enemies deal way more damage if they hit you from behind. Now, if you get hit from behind from close monsters, you will then be applied vulnerable with a scaling percentage of vulnerable damage to you. It doesn't immediately deal bonus damage, but it does apply vulnerable to you, so it shouldn't be as lethal or instantly lethal as it used to be. Crit resistance effects on monsters. It now says that if you take damage, it will reduce the damage of your crits by 3 seconds for a certain percentage. So it's not a permanent crit resistance on enemies, but if you do keep getting hit by monsters, you will feel that crit damage reduction. Death Pulse is no longer going to be stackable, so if you kill a bunch of mobs, they won't just stack like 10 Death Pulses and kill you instantly. And enemies that have a death effect will also no longer have a death pulse, so those effects won't stack on top of each other. Lightning Storm is coming back, but standing in the bubble to block the Lightning Storm will give you a movement speed bonus temporarily, and the bubble will only spawn, or the Lightning Storm will only start when you're actually in combat in dungeons, and the storm can only start if there's a direct path to the bubble from the player, so you no longer will get trapped on ladders and stuff without the bubble to protect you when you're locked in animation. Drifting Shade will also have reduced duration and a longer cooldown, so it's just less annoying overall. World events and Legion events are also going to be improved, including world bosses. They will spawn much more frequently now. Legion events are every 25 minutes instead of every half hour, and world bosses are going to be every 3.5 hours instead of every 6 hours, including global timer warnings for when these events will actually start. So you are much more likely to be noticed or notified of these events happening in the game. Improvements to the endgame rewards. So Nightmare Sigils from Whispers will be within 5 tiers if your highest tier completed on that character or on that account. I don't remember if they specified. Generally, Tree Whispers rewards will be improved. Includes gold from the Tree Whispers is greatly increased. They put greatly in gold font, so hopefully it's a lot of gold. And the XP from the Whisper caches and Hell Tides has also gone up. For the UI, you can now favorite gear instead of just marking stuff as junk, so you can kind of keep items in your inventory that won't be sold or salvaged. There are stash sorting and stash filtering, and you can filter by text and also by affix. So if you have a bunch of aspects in your inventory or in your stash, they will all be sorted together properly now, and you can now also search for them within your stash. So that's good. Nice to see that. For streamers, you can, or people who just want to hide your personal information, there is a hide like character information and stuff in the settings now. So you can like hide your character name and things like that. That's good to see for people who want more privacy on their account. For items, gems are now a material, and they basically drop as shards now, like gem shards, and you can use these shards to craft any gem you want instead of it taking up a bunch of inventory space. The gem, once crafted, will, of course, take up an inventory slot that you can put in your gear, but you just have to gather this material now and just use that to craft all your gems. Enchanting gear will overall be cheaper, but the initial enchantment cost will go up, but each subsequent enchant will not scale as aggressively anymore. Enemies will drop crafting materials instead of gear if that piece of gear is much lower tier than what you are supposed to be getting. So basically what that means is, like, in World Tier 3, you really only care about sacred items, and so when you drop normal rare items, you don't really ever want to use those, like, ever, really. So all of that will instead drop as crafting materials, and you don't have to just pick up a bunch of random rares and sell them that you'll never use. So it should help with the inventory hoarding problem, so you can run probably a couple of Nightmare dungeons before having to, go back to town and clean your inventory out. So they had a whole thing about item power. So item power is now going to be scale with enemy level. So the higher the enemy level, the higher the item power can be on a particular drop of a piece of gear. So currently 820 is basically the cap for item power. That's now being raised to 920. This does not change the stats that are rolled on it. So the ancestral gear that is item power 720 or higher, those affixes will not have a higher range at 920, but it will improve things like weapon damage, armor, and resistances on all your piece of gear. So just they are generally going to be stronger than your 820 item power versions. Level 100 monsters will have item power that goes up to 920. You're not guaranteed 920 item power items from level 100 monsters, but that's like the top end for that. And as you continue to climb the higher Nightmare dungeon tiers, like for example, if you're like level 150 or you're fighting level 150 monsters, the cap is still 920, but you're much more likely to receive items with that item power compared to just regular level 100 monsters. The Uber uniques that drop in the game will always drop at 920 item power, and all of their stats on them will also be max rolled, so you never have to have like low rolled stats on an Uber unique. And I think I forgot to mention, but Uber uniques will have a increased drop chance from a couple of the end game bosses they're adding as well. So they will be a bit more likely. Still rare, but they're giving people at least some way to try and farm them at the end game. Other side notes, the game is coming to Steam. Overwatch 2 came to Steam, so not that surprising. If you do end up buying it on Steam, your progress will carry over. If you already own the game, though, you don't really need to buy it on Steam, but, if you want to buy it on Steam, you can. So, there's that. And then they had some Q&A. Just a few things. People asked about itemization. Really short answer. They basically said they're aware of the feedback, and they're looking to try some things. I wrote down let them cook. We'll see how long this goes. Itemization does need some help, but I'm hoping with these stat changes that they'll talk about next week that maybe itemization will feel a little bit better. But that's some big copium. Just some other miscellaneous things. Someone asked about being able to reset the Paragon board with a single button, and they very humorously said, "Come back next week." So I'm assuming we're going to be getting that with season 2. They very cheekily were like, "Make sure you stay tuned next week on the other dev stream to hear more about Paragon boards and respecking." Asked about clans. They want to do more with it, but it's just not ready yet. Someone asked about set items. They said not yet, but they are adding more uniques compared to season 1. They added 6 unique items in season 1, and they're planning for around 12 uniques in season 2, as well as all the additional legendary aspects and stuff for each class. Someone asked how hard like Uber Duriel will be compared to Uber Lilith, and they said it's pretty close, but Echo Lilith it should be harder than Uber Duriel at the end game. Other things, saving builds like in Diablo 3, they said they really want to do it, but it's just not ready yet. And that's about it. Yeah. Well, that talk about loot filters. They said that they're listening to feedback and they're seeing what they can do about it. Yeah. So I kind of skimmed over a lot of it. It kind of took me forever. Yeah. Thoughts, I guess. Honestly, nothing really stands out as like, ooh, that sounds bad. Which is good. I think your perception of it will vary wildly depending on how much you were hoping the game will be improved. For me, a lot of this stuff does sound pretty interesting. I do want to take a second to focus in on the vampire powers. So the problem with the Malignant Hearts in Season 1 was that they kind of just existed on your character and they didn't really enable anything. They were kind of just like, you deal more damage now, especially with things like the Barber, whereas basically just like, instead of dealing less damage, you now just deal more damage, and that's all it was. Not in any interesting way. It was straight up just like you deal a bunch of damage and a big explosion, and your screen just wipes in front of your eyes constantly. It was very strong. So the vampire powers do seem to be a little bit more interesting. They're not class specific compared to a lot of the Malignant Hearts. A lot of them are actually, I think almost all of them are class agnostic, so they should be applicable to every class in some form or fashion. One of them that they showed on stream actually said your attacks against feared enemies are always overpowered. I found that to be kind of interesting. Things like that kind of make my brain kind of work a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, you can find a way to fear enemies pretty consistently. That would actually be really fucking strong. Especially if you build for overpower, and if they buffed overpower in some way, which I hope they're going to talk about that next week as well. Then there could be some pretty neat stuff going on there. So we'll see. They only showed off a few of them today. There's a good chance they'll probably talk about all of them. At least they did for season 1 with the Malignant Hearts. So hopefully they talk about the vampire powers as we go into season 2, or at least give us a few more to kind of think over in terms of build crafting. There was a lot of like explanation stuff about like why they're adding bosses and like the new additional bosses and stuff like that. It all seems good to me. I look forward to farming these. I hope that they have decent drop rates. I hope they fill in a nice gap, in some of the progression as you continue into World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, especially for classes that really want certain uniques for build enabling stuff. Like druids are, very prone to leveling up to like level 100, and they still don't have the item that they're looking for. They just suffered all the way through. So hopefully this will alleviate that much better. Sounds like it will be. Overall, though, they are definitely focusing on a lot of pushing players into the open world, and I think this might be good enough with things like Tree Whispers, applying or giving you items to summon the Echo of Varshan. Hell Tides will help you summon one of the other bosses. Nightmare Dungeons help you summon one of the other bosses. So there are like things that you can do in the open world that will let you summon and do other things, like with the bosses. Improvements to mounts, so it doesn't feel as bad to mount up anymore. It's a lot smoother to mount up. They're trying to get people like more out of the Nightmare Dungeons and more doing other things. And it's not that they want people to no longer do Nightmare Dungeons, but I think they are wanting people to have different avenues of things they can do and still feel rewarded. Because, Tree Whispers and Helltide, fun, but also like Tree Whispers felt like super unrewarding, and so now they're buffing the rewards very substantially and trying to, incentivize you by giving you a boss you can fight eventually and things like that. So I'm tepid, I'm timid, but I am looking forward to it. They weren't going to fix every single problem that everyone had with Diablo 4 in one season, but this does seem to be a lot more substantial in overall changes in content compared to season one, which is reassuring for the future of the game. I was never that much of a doomer about season one or even the game in general. Obviously, season one didn't land very well, but I do continue to look forward to the updates to the game, and I'm very, very curious to see the stat changes next week because I think that actually might have a bigger impact on the game overall than just what we saw today. So yeah, I mean, I could go into the nitty gritty about every single thing, every note I read, but I mean, honestly, yeah, I mean, everything seemed good. I mean, there's a couple like really standout ones, like the Nightmare Dungeon teleporting you into the dungeon now is very nice. I'll give out some of these. I'll check out some of these Nightmare Dungeon affixes. The ones that got reworked. Anything else? I'm skimming through my notes now. Nah, I mean, curious to see how hard the bosses are. Hopefully they're designed well. And yeah, I'll be back for more Upheaval Gaming for season 2. Well, I'll continue to blast with Upheaval. Well, try my best to at least. So yeah, that was pretty rambly, and hopefully got something out of that. But yeah, all right, that's it for me. Check back next week, October 10th. Second dev live stream. We're gonna talk about stats, character changes, class changes, all that kind of stuff. Uniques are also getting adjusted as well. They did specify that. So there's gonna be a whole bunch of nitty gritty details to go over next week. So stay tuned for that. If you watch all the way to the end in my like half-hour rambling video, congratulations. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.